Hey, shout out to Joshua Laurie, the singer, producer. I don't know. He does a lot of this stuff in Cast the Dragon. That's our little theme song recently. Okay, Through the Black, and go give that guy some love and buy his song since we're using it so much. Hey, you already know it's stuck in your head. You might as well just listen to it all day long until the show comes on. Vic, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. No complaints.
Have you had any rest? Let me ask you that.
Not really. Not really. I'm sort of coasting into a zombie state, but I'm going to be like
Vic,
pinching
it's too
myself
early.
on camera. I know.
It's too early in the week for that.
I know. Before the show, I was like, "This is Thursday, right?" Like seriously, I was like, "Okay, this is Thursday," because this is how I feel on Thursdays. I'm like, "Oh no, it's only Monday."
It's only Monday. Hey, this is the beginning of week 3 of. I lost track of the seasons. Are we on season 3 or 4?
I thought we were 3. I think it's 3.
Yeah, it's 3. But I mean, we could almost say that it's 4 because remember last year when we did that run of Real Dark News shows?
Right. Yes.
But technically, I mean, if you really wanted to be technical, we could say it's like season 6 because if you count all of those years with Jared as season 1. So anyway,
true.
Whatever. Here we are. Whatever. It's almost fall.
Oh my gosh.
So somebody put up a meme. Hey, do you have any plans for the fall? And it said it took me a minute to figure out they meant autumn, not the fall of civilization.
Yeah, which I think is coming soon. Didn't we start a countdown again?
Yeah, I lost track of the countdowns. We do have another one started somewhere. Yeah. So hopefully it doesn't come before our little conference down in Louisville in October, October 14th to 15th. We're hoping the Lord doesn't come back before then, but if he does, hey, it's all right. We understand, or something else, the beginning of the end. Anyway, the Hear the Watchmen conference. And you know what I found out?
What's that?
I found out that there's a discount code for our listeners.
Really?
And yeah, so if you want to get down or up, depending if you live south of Louisville, if you want to get up there, then there's a discount code for you. Sweet. And I was just going to make the announcement tonight on the air, say, hey, Jim, send that video over because I don't know if he sent an email or a text or what. Like he called me one day and I was in the middle of a wedding rehearsal and but I hadn't talked to him and I was like, you know what? Hey, I don't care. It's Jim. I'm going to answer the phone. So
now you're making me feel guilty because I owe him a phone call.
Well, you should feel guilty, Vic.
I do. I do.
Anyway, speaking of weddings, we're going to play this little video here in a second and talk about our promo code. But I did a favor for a friend over the weekend, and I still don't know what happened. I haven't heard if the footage worked out or not. But they wanted me to do drone footage of a wedding. And I was a nervous wreck because usually when I use the drone, I can do as many takes as I want until I get it right.
Yeah.
Well, on a wedding, you pretty much got one shot to get it right.
Sure.
Yeah. So
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it was on Saturday, and right as I'm getting ready, the bride is getting ready to come out. Everybody else is in position. The software on my drone wants to update.
Oh no.
I am not kidding you.
What?
And I don't know what happened. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't pray, I panicked. Okay?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Somehow it worked and I got the drone off the ground. And as far as I know, we got really good footage, but I don't know what happened. I think the Lord intervened. I don't know, but I was so afraid that there was going to be absolutely no footage. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. This thing will not go up. But it did go up.
That's a bad joke.
Yeah. Anyway, so without any further ado, because there's been a lot so far, let's go ahead and watch that little trailer that talks about our promo code here for this Hear the Watchmen conference down in Tennessee. So check it out, guys.
Hey, Through the Black family, it's Mike Kerr, founder of Hear the Watchmen. Come on out, Louisville, Kentucky, October 14th through 16th. See Tom and Vicky Joy and a whole host of other speakers that will teach you what you need to know about spiritual warfare. Use the promotional code TOM20. Save yourself $20 off that ticket price. Go to hearthewatchmen.com. Get signed up today. We'll see you in Louisville.
And there we go, Vic. He sure does have a lot of confidence in us. We're going to teach everybody what they need to know.
Yeah, no doubt.
I hope we don't let them down.
Tom 20, man, you got your own code. Hey, good news, bad news for the overly observant people. You may have noticed that L.A. Marzulli's photo is not on that flyer anymore. Very unfortunately, he's not going to be there. But the good news is we now have Dr. Mike Spalding coming. So for those of you who are hoping to see L.A., he's not going to be there, but Mike Spalding will be there with us.
Dr. Mike is going to be in Louisville, so you don't have to go all the way to Lima to see Dr. Mike.
That's right.
That's going to be amazing. Hey, I'm glad he's going to be there. So good stuff. And we're going to have Mike on, Mike Kerr on one night this week for a few minutes to talk about the conference. I'm excited about it. Just getting to see everybody again. We have another one a couple weeks after that. I'm going to be in Pennsylvania. We'll let you know about that as soon as we get details. And yeah, I don't know. So I think that's it. There's another one. I mean, there's a Tom Horn thing, but that's all video. So we will we'll let you know about that as we get details. But you guys can go to throughtheblack.com, click on the contact button, and that's going to show you where the conferences are, all of our stuff. So yeah, and then on the conference, as long as we're talking about conferences, let me just say there's going to be an announcement in a few weeks, and I can't say what it is. Okay. Ooh. But it's a big announcement, and it's about Through the Black. Okay. And it's about some other stuff. So I don't know. Vic, have you ever I don't know if you're what you know about automobiles, but have you ever heard of a escape? I was behind an escape today.
I think my dad drives an escape.
Does he?
Yeah, he does.
So, this is a true story. Okay. A true story. I was driving behind a Ford Escape today, and I was like, "What is an escape?" I was like, "I never heard of that. It must be a new." I don't know where it had been a busy morning, right?
I guess. Oh my gosh. That's hysterical. Yeah, you went French all of a sudden. Escape.
Well, I know. I was having a conversation with myself. I was like, escape? When does this, when do they make this? I'm like out of the loop, as far as what's out there, car-wise. I haven't bought a new car in a long time, but anyway.
That's
Vic, awesome. Yeah, well, just like you said, you feel like it's Thursday already. I've had a crazy busy morning running, but I'm glad to be here. I don't know if anybody's seen yet. Probably most of you have. If you haven't, go check out the little short 30-minute documentary that I made of going down to Troy, Ohio last Thursday. I got invited down there to just kind of cover this little thing that was going on, and I got to interview some friends and some Satanists and some feminists and stuff like that. So it's on the Through the Black YouTube channel. Guys, thank you for liking and subscribing, and smashing the like button and sharing the videos. We are making new friends when you do that. We appreciate it. If you tweet it out or just let people know or share our emails or whatever you do, thank you. It means the world to us. So, Vic, it seems as though we have kind of like a theme this week. And it just kind of happened that way, I think.
Yeah.
It just worked out. We kind of maybe half planned it, but along with chapter 3 of the book, and tonight and tomorrow night, and maybe some other stuff going on, I'm just gonna let everybody know what's going on this week, what we're talking about.
Yeah, we kind of have this theme going, all right. So chapter 3 that we're doing on Thursday is a lot on Theosophy, which ties greatly into the dogma of the astral plane and sleep paralysis, etc. So anyway, we're going to be talking about two of the largest proponents of propelling Theosophy into the 19th century, Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky. And then tomorrow we're going to do a deeper dive into the actual religion of Theosophy itself. And we might even tie a little loosely, indirectly, into the topic for Audiotopsy as well.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting week. Let me just say that, hey, we are, when we bring it, we bring it. So anyway.
Don't make any promises we can't keep. We're going to do our best.
Yeah. I just feel like making a lot of promises that we can't keep. You ever feel like that? Like
Mike, we're going to tell you guys everything you need to know about Theosophy.
And then because, so about every third vehicle around here is an escape.
That's right. That's right. Mm-hmm.
So, Vic, Helena Blavatsky, and Alice Bailey. Now, in my early years of hanging out and studying with Russ, those names came up so much. But I have not heard them in recent years, and I had to do a little bit of a crash refresher course this evening just to get all of my facts straight. Now, hopefully I can remember a lot of those facts from a few hours ago until now. But I'm counting on you more than anything to really carry the weight of this show. So
no pressure.
I mean, I guess we go chronologically here.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest.
That's the right way to do it.
No, I was going to suggest that as well. Yeah, so we'll start with Blavatsky.
Well, take it away.
So I'm just going to start out with some just human biographical stories, just things that I thought was interesting. So Blavatsky is actually her married name, her first marriage. And I don't know if you read up on this first marriage, Tom. Extremely fascinating. This could be a movie. So Helena was born to a very aristocratic, wealthy family in Ukraine. And she was engaged to be married at 16, a prearranged marriage at 16, to a 40-year-old guy who was like a vice governor. He had this like long name, this long title. And
I couldn't pronounce it, yeah.
Yeah. So the way the story goes is they got married in July, and by October, she literally like runaway bride got on a horse and like took off back to her hometown. And they never got divorced, and I don't know how quickly afterwards, but he did die, and not to anything that she had it to do with it. But so according to her memoirs, like her scrapbook, as she called her journal, she was only with him for 3 weeks, and it was never consummated, and it was in form only, and that's the way the story goes. But I thought that was pretty interesting. So she already had a pretty colorful life by the time she was 16. She was always sort of destined for, I think, a strange path. Even her mother told her that on her deathbed. Her mother said something strange, like, well, at least now that something to the effect of, well, at least now that I'm dying, I don't have to see poor Helena lived her life out, because she always knew that Helena was like kind of destined for hardship and had some sort of calling. And as the story goes, they thought she was going to die when she was born. And I can't remember what sort of plague was going around at the time that she was born, but they were afraid that the baby wouldn't live. So they had this sort of like emergency vigil where they all kind of gathered at the church and baptized her, in case she died.
And the
And
Russian Orthodox Church, right?
yeah. And one of the little choir boys or whatever sitting in the front pew with the candle fell asleep and I think lit the whole church on fire. So
I missed that in my research. Interesting.
yeah. So if that wasn't an omen of what was to come, and oh man, she set the world on fire, but maybe not in the best way. But Theosophy, so she's known as one of the founders of the Theosophical Society, and I just want to make it clear that she didn't come up with Theosophy. That was in long existence before her. She came up with the society.
We're going to go deeper into Theosophy tomorrow night, but
Yep.
we gotta kind of maybe explain what that is at the beginning here, because these two ladies, if we can call them ladies, are directly connected to that. So I began to look up the word, but then I kind of thought, how the word was made, and I was like, you know what, maybe I can figure this out. Theo, the study of God, and psychology, or not psychology, but help me here.
Philosophy.
What's the rest of the word?
Philosophy.
Philosophy. Yes. So the study of God and philosophy combined together. So
yeah, it's a mishmash. We'll go into it tomorrow, but there's a lot of Buddhism and Hinduism and like pre-Aryan kind of stuff. In fact, the original symbol of the Theosophical Society had a swastika on it, and it had nothing to do, obviously, back in the 1800s. It didn't mean what we think it means. And in fact, I've got friends from India who have told me, because they don't necessarily sit and learn American history and they don't study World War II and all that. And he said, we never knew that the swastika had this like bad connotation to it. He said it's our peace sign here in Hinduism. It's a peace sign. And so I've noticed that the symbol has changed. Now, if you go online and look at Theosophical Society, it's a Star of David, which may or may not be any better. But apparently they've canceled the swastika on that. But so
yeah, and Audrey mentioned when you look at it, you notice the swastika is the other direction.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. So there's kind of a little bit of everything thrown in there. And, it's funny, back when I was writing my book, I cracked this joke where it's like, I said, all roads lead to Theosophy. And then sometimes I said, all roads lead to Blavatsky, because it didn't matter if I was like going down the rabbit hole of astral projection or like ascended masters or the spirit guides or even sleep paralysis itself. You get, it's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? It's the 6 degrees of Helena Blavatsky. Anything New Age that you study, you're eventually going to very quickly hit her. And the other gal we're going to be talking about, Alice Bailey, she actually was one of the first people to coin the phrase New Age. Right. So that kind of gets tied back to her. So Theosophy is just a mix of everything, and it was sort of dying out. Theosophy was sort of kind of on its last leg, and Blavatsky and Bailey really breathed new life into it. And through their writings and Bailey's printing press and all of the materials that they got out there, it really entered into a new century, and it has followed us ever since. So we have these ladies to thank for resurrecting that old dogma from the dead.
Well, I think it's interesting, the similarity between their lives. There are a few of them.
There are.
And especially with marriage and divorce. And, I don't think Helena Blavatsky's ties to the church and Christianity were as deep as Alice. But their travels, their world travels, were very similar. The Helena Blavatsky, she was the runaway bride, and I think she went on kind of at first she went on pretty much a dangerous trek, getting away from her marriage. And I couldn't 100% understand the timeline. And when they went through some canal or some strait somewhere, and it was like just a deadly mission. Both of them ended up in India and Tibet, maybe.
Mhm.
And then both of them ended up in New York at one point.
Yes. Yeah.
So which is interesting. But yeah, and Alice, yeah, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Good point, James. Alice had a Christian upbringing, hated church.
Yeah.
So but anyway, yeah, the similarities are there, and I don't know, I just kind of thought that was interesting. These women were living probably, in their adventures maybe 50 years apart approximately, give or take, and very similar lives.
Yeah, I think they had about an 11-year overlay where they were contemporaries, where they were both alive at the same time. But in I didn't find any evidence that they had actually ever met. But Bailey was, of course, very familiar with Blavatsky and her writing, and very influenced by the secret doctrine, as was Hitler and Himmler. Many of the Nazis and the Nazi Party hailed Blavatsky as, their guru. They were all very well acquainted with the secret doctrine and probably her other writings as well. And so, yeah, so Blavatsky, most well-known work would be The Secret Doctrine, but she also wrote Isis Unveiled, The Key to Theosophy, and The Voice of Silence. I'm not sure that she was real prolific with a lot of, there's mixed ideas of how prolific she was writing things other than those major tomes. But there's a lot of, they call it her scrapbook, which is a detailed journal. And it sounds like they still have access to that. And they're quoting from that at length. And apparently she didn't talk too much about all of her travels. And so we know a lot of the places that she went, and she made it all around the world. She became a U.S. citizen at one point, but I don't think she was here very long. And she was in London and a lot of time in India. And that's another thing that Bailey and Blavatsky had in common. Like you said, that they were both in India, but ironically, Bailey was in India on a Christian mission initially through the YWCAs. Right. So she was over there preaching the gospel. And I think that's where she met her first husband, who was it an Episcopalian or an Anglican?
He was a priest, yeah.
Yeah, he was a pastor.
Episcopalian, yeah.
Yeah, and so they wound up moving to California. Bailey was British. She was from England initially, and so she was kind of like a Sunday school teaching, Bible thumping, pastor's wife, housewife, until the marriage went bad. So that was pretty interesting.
And I just want to point out another similarity. Think about Crowley, Aleister Crowley. He was a world traveler as well and a mountain climber. We're going to be talking about him in a couple weeks, because we're going to just kind of probably in the same way we're doing tonight, talk about Aleister Crowley and Anton LaVey and their influences. I was just saying before the show started, in a way, Helena and Alice are like the female basically precursors to Crowley and LaVey. Those four names are pretty influential. You know what I'm saying? Those are the rock stars of all of this stuff, if you think about it. There's some other ones out there, but probably none as well known as them. And then, probably, people are going to know. Your average person is more likely to know about Crowley and LaVey. And probably most people don't know about Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of why we're talking about them tonight, because their contributions to the New Age movement, to the Theosophical Society, and that influence, and those influences on what's happening, occult practices today, are foundational. Okay. And we're going to get into where did they come from, what happened with Alice Bailey. and and then Blavatsky and the Ascended Masters. We talked about the Ascended Masters last week. Okay, if anybody here is confused, don't worry, that's normal. This is very confusing. Okay, just learn a few of these vocabulary words, and then you can talk to your new ager down the road and tell them about Jesus. Okay, so learn enough to be dangerous. And anyway, so I'm not sure where to go here, but last week, Vic, we talked about the Ascended Masters. Okay, and these were very influential, in connecting with Blavatsky, okay, and her just basically taking these teachings, taking these communications, and sharing them. And I'm not sure who penned this this slogan, and I'm gonna get it wrong, maybe. There is no religion higher than truth. Okay, that was kind of like their slogan for the Theosophy Society. I think that came from Blavatsky. She was quoting somebody else. Does that sound familiar to you?
No, but that doesn't mean, that just means I didn't run across it in my research. But it's kind of ironic. But that's the thing too, though, with Theosophy, is they did mix in aspects of Christianity. That's what makes it confusing, and I think that's what makes it appealing to believers who aren't necessarily well read in the scriptures. And like Bailey was known, she wrote this famous prayer that's been like translated into like 80 languages now, and it was called the Great, let's see, it's probably in my notes, the Great something. Anyway, she wrote this prayer, and it was after her death. Someone actually studied it and determined that she probably didn't really write it. But what's interesting is, you're talking about Ascended Masters. She's talking all about light and love, the light and love of God, right? And the great invocation. And it sounds very New Age. And, when we were talking about the Ascended Masters on a previous show, we were talking about how the Ascension glossaries define it as the Ascended Masters are beings of light and love. And so a lot of people, when they astral projector, they have these visitations and they see this being of light and love. They ascribe it to being God, or they ascribe it to being Jesus or the Holy Spirit, but it's really these Ascended Masters. And the gurus in Theosophy were called the Masters. But interestingly, in this great invocation, one of the things that they're invoking is that Christ would return to the earth. So a Christian would read that and go like, oh, this is Christian. It's talking about the light and the love of God, and that Christ would return to earth. But when you dig deep into that, and I don't want to go too much into what we're going to be talking about tomorrow, but Theosophy as well as Rosicrucianism, they borrow Christian terms. And so you would think that they were preaching a Christian sermon, but it's all code. There's esoteric meanings assigned to all of those. So you read something like that, and it's talking about, may Christ return to the earth. They're not talking about what a Christian thinks they're talking about. So that's what makes things like Theosophy and Rosicrucianism especially really, really tough. And there's a lot of very well admired church fathers that if you really delve into the nitty gritty, there's speculation that they were perhaps a little bit more influenced by Rosicrucianism than the Christianity that we attribute them to.
Vic, I want to kind of take maybe a pause, or right turn down a rabbit hole real quick. And I'm thinking of these women, and I'm thinking about the times that they were living, and that it was a difficult time for a woman, okay, to do anything, okay? But these women involved in the occult were kind of rising above the rest. Now, I'm not saying they didn't have their share of hardships, okay? They did, Alice, she dealt with poverty, and they were, just in ridiculous
Orphans.
situations like the arranged marriage and things like that. But it's kind of interesting that they were used as leaders, okay? In this movement, in this New Age occult movement. I went and grabbed this book before the show, and not going to get a whole lot into this, but this book is called, I don't know if anybody can see it, Mrs. Satan. and it's about Victoria Woodhull. Is that her name? Victoria Woodhull, who's from a little bit less than an hour from where I'm at right now. And interestingly enough, there's a mound that she used to walk up on down in southern Ohio and prophesy from and mix the New Age with Christianity. And she used to preach, like, as a little girl, like hellfire and brimstone type stuff. And it was really weird. She was really involved in the occult and fortune telling and all that kind of stuff. And she was the very first female candidate for president in the United States of America. And she got the nickname Mrs. Satan. And it's kind of hard to see. I don't know if you can see the cover of that because it's black on black.
Yeah.
But the cover is her. She looks like Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. Okay. And it was a cartoon that they made, and that's what they nicknamed her, Mrs. Satan. And I'm looking for her, like, what her timeline was. It was in the late 1800s. She was born. She lived in New York City, by the way. And one of the things that she was running on in the late 1800s as the first female candidate for the president of the United States was free love, basically. And open marriages.
Wow.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
That's so fascinating.
These female leaders from over 100 years ago were really dark.
Yeah. Well, and it's also fascinating too, because, you know, us in modernity, we don't think that stuff goes back any further than the 1960s. Like the 1960s gets blamed for all of the you know, the bra burning and the feminist movements and what did they call it back then? The ERA, was it the Equal Rights? What are those ladies called themselves?
Equal Rights Amendment, yeah.
But it is interesting. And one of the things that I thought was really fascinating when I was researching Alice Bailey, so she and her sister were orphaned. She was 8 years old when both of her parents died of TB. And so they lived with grandparents, but they came from a wealthy family. So they had people like financially supporting them. And it's kind of, you know, like, I can't remember what you called it, but like the whole Dickens novel, Great Expectations, that this guy is getting money from like this anonymous person. And this was something that they did back then. I can't remember the word. There's a word for it. So anyway, Alice Bailey had one of these guys who was supporting her. And I want to read this because this is just going to kind of fall into place with what we're talking about. We're like, were these women chosen? Were they just really these amazing women who were trailblazers, or was there some sort of purpose like carved out for them, and were they chosen, and was there some sort of purpose in it? This is very fascinating.
Keep going, Vic. I'm glad you're going there. Go ahead.
Yep. When Alice was a teenager in England, she had been under the supervision of a mysterious man who had visited her in person twice. She described their first encounter in her unfinished autobiography. Quote, "He told me there was some work, that it was planned that I could do in the world, but that it would entail my changing my disposition very considerably." And remember, she's the one that grew up in the church. "I would have to give up being such an unpleasant little girl and must try and get some measure of self-control. My future usefulness to him and to the world was dependent upon how I handled myself and the changes I could manage to make. Many years later," the plot thickens, this is where it gets great. "Many years later, after she had joined the Theosophical Society and lived in Crotona," so she's on her second marriage and has 3 children at this point. So I think she's
California, right?
Yep, living in California. I think she's about 35 now. The first time she went into the shrine room of the Theosophical Lodge, she saw a portrait of this man on the wall, this man that she had met twice, who had told her that stuff about her future, and only then learned that his name was Master Kut Humi and that he was a member of the spiritual hierarchy. Her spontaneous recognition was viewed by some members of the lodge as an effort to claim special status. So I just thought that was interesting, that she's confronted twice in her teenage years by this mysterious man. And the way that reads it, it makes it sound like she's this bad girl and she has to get on track. But the fact is, she was living a pretty, biblical life at that point. She was going on mission trips to India and things like that. So it almost makes me wonder what he meant by you have to make drastic changes in order to be used to the world.
And from what I was looking at, I guess the best way to describe it, she had a real bad attitude. She was just very discontent. She hated her life, and the man who I guess I'm don't understand it 100%. I thought it was like some kind of apparition that came, but it was.
It's very ambiguous when you read about it, because she does refer, and I think James just made a comment too. She wrote to him as if she called him her spirit guide,
right?
And that's an astral term. And so if he was an ascended master, he would have been something formerly human and now astral. So I don't know if James said anything more about that, but yeah, he's very ambiguous when he's even written about.
So think of Joseph Smith, okay? And there's plenty of other examples out there. I was going to look up another one. I can't remember which cult it was. But Joseph Smith, Mormons, okay? Angels gave him golden plates, okay? With these inscriptions on them. Nobody's ever seen these golden plates, okay? Now, hey, the Book of Mormon, I don't know if I don't think it came from Joseph Smith. I think it was Doctrine of Demons, that, basically, automatic writing, just like, all of these writings that we're going to be talking about tonight. But Joseph Smith, and it's been a while since I've read the story, but he was looking for, you know what I'm saying? Truth, or maybe a deeper relationship, but something was off and he was vulnerable. Okay. His heart was not right, and the enemy saw an opportunity to come in. And just like, we're talking about Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky being picked out or chosen, look at how Joseph Smith was chosen. Okay. Now this guy was a con man, and a real good one. He used to do things like make up treasure maps and sell them, right?
Yeah, that's
and
right.
So anyway, he penned the Book of Mormon and fooled a whole lot of people. I mean, to the point of, the Mormon religion is a force to be reckoned with, in some ways. Now, I mean, these guys work their butts off, right? The Mormons, they got to knock on 1 million doors to get to one, but they're looking for, that person or that Christian that's right in the right moment, and they're vulnerable and they're seeking and they need help, or they're hurting or something like that. They feel rejected, and they're going to keep knocking until, they find the right person. Anyway, they fooled a lot of people, and there's, look at many different cults have been started this way. So we can see the devil's fingerprints all over this thing. Now, Joseph Smith, his account was an angel. Okay. Helena Blavatsky, ascended masters. Okay. Alice Bailey, the Tibetan. Okay. So we know that Satan can disguise himself, transform himself into an angel of light, and he can show up as your grandpa or the Tibetan, or an angel, and he can be very deceiving. Obviously, go back to Genesis chapter 3, and he was able to deceive Eve, and Eve knew the word. She even said, God didn't say that, and he came back and said, did God really say this? Or she said, God said this, and he was like, did God really say that? And look at, when we compare Eve to maybe Alice Bailey, she had a Christian upbringing, and she complained that she had a very her Christianity was very, maybe this is not her words but mine, like narrow-minded, and then if people didn't believe exactly the way that she believed, then they couldn't be saved, and that turned her off, and it was just like, it was like a bad experience for her. So her foundation was weak. Joseph Smith's foundation was weak. Okay. Same thing, you know, with many of these other people out there. The enemy saw a vulnerability, and he will do it with us. He doesn't care if we start a cult or not. Okay. He is looking for weak foundations, for vulnerabilities. Okay. He's looking for that opportunity, like Eve. Okay. That opportunity, like Al Bailey, to come in at the perfect time and to bring deception and to mesmerize us. Okay. So anyway, Vic, help me out here.
Yeah, so I got to be careful here, just because, you know, everything's so PC these days. But the thing that I found so sobering when I started to study Alice Bailey is, you always assume when you've got someone who's that influential in the occult that, oh, they came from bad blood, or they came from some occult family, or that, so you don't expect to hear that someone lived the same exact life I lived for 35 years. And, usually by the time you're pushing 40, you're kind of set in your ways. And so to experience that radical of a transformation that late in life, it was very sobering, like, but she did experience tragedy. Like she was orphaned at 8. And so that was
Both
trauma.
of her parents died. Yeah.
Both of them died when she was 8 of TB. And with Blavatsky, forced into a marriage at 16. So both of them, for different reasons, lost the protection of their father. One died, another was like, married her off. And maybe back in those days that was totally normal. Maybe that was the culture. I don't know.
Look at the formula. Exactly.
But the formulas, they were vulnerable. They were out from underneath their biblical headship, and so now they were vulnerable. And that's when bitterness and anger and resentment and other things can come in. Both of them rebelled in their marriages. Both of them initiated the divorces in their life. They weren't left. They weren't abandoned. They weren't spurned. They were both, this stinks. This is oppressive. They both said, this is oppressive. Bailey's accusation against her husband was like he was mean-tempered, and maybe he was volatile and abusive. I don't know. But the fact is they both became susceptible then, because you can talk about how they were trailblazers, and they were not living the typical life of a woman back then, and they were traveling. Blavatsky traveled the world alone. I mean, how unheard of, and how vulnerable she must have been, sitting in trains alone and stuff. I mean, she must have just been a sitting duck for people who would want to take advantage, and who knows what happened on all those travels. That's the kind of things that history books don't say. But the fact is, they weren't alone, just picking themselves up by their own bootstraps. What they did is they surrounded themselves by very influential men, these leaders and these masters and these people high up in these societies and these lodges and these colonies. And so they were, despite them looking like these extremely strong, trailblazing women, they really were vulnerable in that they were being taken advantage of, because, even with a lot of the stuff that they wrote, like with Alice Bailey, she's credited with writing, that Great Invocation, but then after her death, it's like a lot of people don't think she really wrote that. And so I just wonder if these women were being used, and they were part of the mission, and they accomplished the goal, and they got all the glory, and they put their name on everything. But what they really were was they were used by the enemy to, prop up this occult doctrine. And Bailey and her husband, I mean, they started Lucius Trust, which is still around to this day, wreaking all sorts of havoc with the materials that they're making readily available. And so I don't know. It's one of those things where history like paints them as these towering, strong women, but I don't think that they would have been taken advantage of the way that they were if they hadn't been vulnerable and if they hadn't been rebellious to a certain degree. And I don't think it was necessarily even that was the path that they started out on. I think that, it's traumatic to lose both your parents at 8 years old,
Right.
It'd be hard to square that with a loving God and religion in an 8-year-old brain.
So for anybody listening, I'm assuming a lot of, I mean, I'm seeing the comments here in the chat, and we're there are some people that are like, okay, they know what's going on, and I can tell they probably know a lot more about this than I do. James and some other people, they're very familiar with these guys. But so I want to try to make a distinction. It's a little bit difficult. Okay, Helena Blavatsky is the one that kind of looks like a linebacker, and she looks like she's miserable. Okay, so maybe we can put up a picture just so everybody knows who we're talking about. There you go. Yeah. So anyway,
That's awesome.
yeah, Helena Blavatsky there, and she is the one out of the Ukraine, and chronologically, she's the one first. Was she born in the 1830s? I think.
Yeah, 1831.
Okay, and then died in 1891.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so that's not even, what would that be? Was that even 60 years? Okay, she lived, so I guess that's all right. And then and like you said, they probably shared the earth for about 11 years. Okay, but as far as we know, never met each other. And then Alice Bailey came along later, and if you got a picture of Alice Bailey and you want to throw that up, Katie, just so people know who we're talking about, that's Alice Bailey. She, died in 1949, I think.
Yep.
So anyway, there you go. Who knows how old she is in that picture? Maybe in her 50s, probably. So I thought it was interesting, and I'm trying to keep this chronological, but as I'm thinking of stuff, I'm a little bit more refreshed on Alice Bailey. When Alice Bailey was approached by this entity to write these books, she first rejected it, and she shocked herself because she said out loud, she said, "No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do anything psychic." And she was like, "Why in the world did I just say that out loud?" She was like, "Is this really happening?" She didn't know if she was going crazy or what. And the spirit said, "I'll give you a couple weeks to think about it. I'm going to come back, in 3 weeks." Well, okay. Spoiler alert. She did. She wrote it. She wrote a bunch of volumes. Okay. And she wrote the externalization of the hierarchy, which is the one I always heard Russ talk about. And here is, again, keep in mind, she had a Christian foundation. She was a missionary, but two things happened. One, the foundation was weak. One, she was a little bit disgruntled. Okay. She was not happy. And there was trauma from losing her parents. Okay. Not just two things, but there was a great, a perfect recipe for her. Okay. And then, just the bad marriage, all of these things, and bad foundation. And I forget the second point I was going to make. But just, the deception from the enemy. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he's very, very tricky. And again, same thing with Helena Blavatsky. Yeah. So, but she rejected it at first, which I was surprised when I heard that part, that she said she wasn't going to do it, because it seemed like she was in over her head at that point with Theosophy. But she still had something maybe from her youth is like, no, I'm not going to do this,
Yeah.
And I think it was, it just became so real to her. And I can't remember if it was Helena or Alice that said one of their missions was to say, hey, this is, spiritualism is real, and we want to tell the world that spiritualism is real. So,
well, and it's interesting too, the timing of when there was this great shift with Bailey. She was separated in 1915 and then officially divorced in 1919, I think. I mean, imagine being a divorced woman with 3 children in 1919. So now you're alone. People are looking at you, and because she's like the Sunday school teacher, church. So you're in church, and you're divorced. And now, then she had to get a job. So she worked like in a sardine factory or something like that, a sardine cannery. So now she's got a job, and there was probably not only some shame and bitterness there, and God only knows what the gossip and stuff was, but she also now has to take care of her kids and earn an income, and and I don't know what women made in 1915, but I can't imagine it was a lot of money. So it was at this time that she started attending these Theosophical Society meetings, and I'm sure she was empowered by the fact, like, oh, look at this woman who left her husband at 16 and she went on to do these great things, and she traveled, and there's probably like an admiration there. And I just think that she was susceptible at that time as well, because she was going through another traumatic experience and having to reinvent herself. And so it's just interesting. And I mean, again, I was just sobered when I read her story, because I thought, at any point in my life or your life, at any point in our life, we can have some sort of tragic break where everything, life as we know it, falls apart, and we're in some sort of a dark night of the soul. And we're so vulnerable in those periods of time. And I remember in 2013, after my mom died, there was a woman in a Bible study group of mine who was a widow, and she's like, I want to take you out to lunch. And so she took me out to lunch, and the whole point of her taking me out was, she said, Vicki, here's something that no one told me after my husband died. When you're in grief and you're putting off all of this sort of like grief energy, the narcissists and the sociopaths find you. They can smell you a mile away. And she said, don't make any new friends for like the next 3 years. Don't let a bunch of strangers into your life. Don't get rid of all your friends and get new friends. Like, this is the kind of stuff that happens. And she gave me really good advice there, because I had that on my brain. A lot of those types of people did come into my life at the time. And in some cases I was smart enough to take the advice. And in the cases when I didn't, I really paid for it. So God only knows where Alice Bailey's emotions were at that point. And I think some of these people sniffed her out and took advantage of her. I'm not saying that she doesn't have culpability. It was a perfect storm. It was just, to me, it was a perfect storm.
well, nobody forces us, right?
Right.
To do the wrong thing. We're hardwired to do the wrong thing. But also, we know that we have an enemy that's very tricky, and we're more vulnerable the further we are away from the Lord and the less grounded we are. Okay.
Yeah.
And by the way, there's people that are strong and grounded in the Lord that can just as easily slip up and fall and, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's,
Absolutely.
it's
yeah. There was a talk in the chat a few minutes ago, I think with James and Audrey, and they were talking about how influential Lucis Trust has been in the United Nations to this day. And I did actually have something directly pertaining to that I wanted to
mention
read.
the original name of Lucis Trust.
Was it Lucifer Trust? Was it Lucifer? Yeah, Lucifer Press. Yeah. Okay, so groups in the Bailey tradition have had several names, and these are all still on. If you go to the Lucis Trust website today, all of these things are on the website even to this day. So among these groups in the Bailey tradition are the World Goodwill, Triangles, meditation groups for the New Age. World Goodwill was founded in 1932 with the purpose of helping establish right relationships among the peoples of the world. It is an accredited non-government organization at United Nations centers in New York and Geneva. So the UN is deeply entangled and influenced by the Bailey Theosophical traditions.
So they're still a great influence today, right? I mean, here,
Yes.
I
Huge.
mean, they are, you could say, and I have a book in my library. I should have brought that book out by Gary Kah, the demonic roots of globalism, that talks about Blavatsky and Bailey. Okay. So the connection from the Theosophy society to the United Nations, globalism, yeah, and all that. And whether they're talking about global warming or whatever, they're right in the middle of it. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. There's so many things like this is going to kind of plant the seeds for tomorrow when we talk about theosophy. There was a great article. I think it was a 3-part article that I read, and it was in my original manuscript, but I think it got pulled out. I had a lot of stuff in there about Blavatsky, but he talks about the origins of the swastika. And so he talks about Blavatsky. And when you become familiar with theosophy, when you read what its tenets are, what its goals are, and it gets crazy. I mean, some of this stuff Blavatsky talks flat out about the Atlantean societies and the sunken, she doesn't call it Atlantis. She calls it, I can't think of the word now. Maybe James remembers it, but it's, she has a different word for it, but she's talking about Atlantis. But if you're familiar with theosophy, and what they wanted to do to shape and influence the world and what they want to bring in by way of like the world peace and all that, you'll see it all over the news every day. All this stuff that's happening to us, it's just got theosophical fingerprints all over it. Everything's just going according to plan. Blavatsky would be very happy with what was going on today.
And, I'm just, looking at some of this stuff in the chat. I'm in agreement that these women knew what they were doing, but they knew what they were doing. But I think that they believed that they were hearing from these ascended masters, from the Tibetan, and they were, doing the bidding. It was deception. It was, I don't think that they knew, and I could be wrong. Who knows, how deep they were. But at least at the beginning, they didn't know that they were interacting with demons. So
no. And were either one of these, Tom, did either one of them do automatic writing? Because if either one of them were doing automatic writing, they weren't even really the authors of that stuff then to begin with. But I'm not sure if they.
I kind of took it for granted that Alice Bailey was when it came to the Tibetan. So
that's what I thought. I remembered that one of them did. Lemuria. Yeah, thank you, James. Lemuria is the other term she was using for Atlantis. Thank you. I never would have picked that out of my head.
Yeah. I think what this boils down to, one of the things it boils down to is Christianity plus. Okay. This is what we're seeing. And again, going back to that, the foundation wasn't good. They didn't have the ability to take a look at like, this spirit of this entity is saying this, or and I'm going to mix it with my childhood beliefs in Christianity. I think of Johanna Michelson. If anybody's seen our film, This Is a War, she talks about what happened to her when she was a young woman in Mexico City, and this is her testimony. You can see the film. We got extensive interview with her, and I can't remember what's in the film and what we heard in the interview, but basically she became a Christian. She understood what it was to be a Christian, but she was never discipled. Mm-hmm. Okay, and she had no one to disciple her, so she was still partaking in some things that she shouldn't have been doing. And when she found out that it was wrong, when she got discipled, she got rid of it. But think about Johanna Michelson. If she wouldn't have looked to the word as her guide, what would have happened with her? She's written a few books. She was influential. There's a lot of people that make a left turn, pun intended, because we've been talking about the left-hand path here. and they don't make it back. There's some people that do.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that grounding, then how many kids are leaving their youth group and their church and going to college and coming back, and they're not the same kids.
Yeah.
Youth groups not doing the job, okay,
Yeah.
that it needs to strengthen these kids for the real world.
Yeah. And I think it's important too, we always kind of get this question, like, why is it important to talk about these things? Shouldn't we just be talking about Jesus? Shouldn't we just be talking about the gospel? Specifically, the reason why it is so important to talk about theosophy is because if you understand what this religion is and what it teaches and what its goals are, you will see it everywhere, and you'll see it in a lot of modern Christianity too, a lot of nominal Christianity. And we have to be able to determine, like you were just saying, when we read something that sounds really good, we have to test that spirit to see, is this real? Is the light and the love and the gospel and the Christ with the capital C that they're talking about here really Christianity, or is it not? And I have read so many books that were written in the 19th and 20th century that are solid on every pastor's shelf, and seminary classes are taught on these works and everything. But if you understand theosophy, or if you understand Rosicrucianism, it's all over that stuff. And we are being fire hosed with this stuff. And you add to that this age of disclosure we're in now, with all this paranormal stuff and these visitations and the sleep paralysis and the UFOs. And we had better put on a raincoat, because we are getting fire hosed. We have to know the difference between what we believe and what they're telling us.
The devil don't care how he gets you, as long as he gets you. If he can get you to become a drug addict, or deceive you with globalism and theosophy or whatever. Hey, I want to, if you could put up that the quote from James again. It's the Johanna Michelson quote. Oh, yeah. So this is beautiful. So James is signaling to us that he has seen the movie, and this is a quote. I'll never forget the moment I was there. That we filmed this, and she said this. So, Vic, can you read that?
Yeah, absolutely. Have you taken a good look at this baby you're clutching so fervently to your breast? This baby's eyes are feral and yellow and slanted. This is Rosemary's baby. What the heck is it doing in your tub?
And she's talking about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? And I remember when she said that, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. I was like, that is the most killer, trailer material. And I'm like looking around, I'm like pinching myself. I'm like, is this real? This is amazing. Like, when I made especially the first two films, there were so many things that happened. Like, oh my gosh, I'm just getting stupid behind the camera. Like, this is amazing material. These people are, just pouring their hearts out, in front of the camera. I'm like, oh, dude, this is going to be so much fun to edit. But yeah, it was. So, just wondering which well-known past church leaders had some leanings towards Rosicrucianism. Do you know, Vic?
Well, I do. And the reason I don't often say it is because it enrages people, and people get cognitive dissonance, because these are people that were taught in church to dearly, dearly, dearly love. But if you do a lot of deep research, or Gary Wayne writes extensively about it. But the Inklings, of which Tolkien and Lewis were a part of, was led by Rosicrucian. And in fact, if you read the rules of the Inklings, it was required that you be a part of that. And those two men are so heavily protected because the church has claimed them. But if you look into Gary Wayne's research, he goes deep. And I was brokenhearted the first time I read it. But then he goes into with Lewis, like the books and things that he's written are pretty Christian, but if you go into his letters and the things that he that weren't published, if you go into his letters and things like that, there's a lot of really sketchy stuff in there.
Interesting. So I think I saw some maybe some social media things from Gary Wayne talking about Lewis, but I can't remember.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is heartbreaking. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's rough. And there's even, I think, Tom, I was talking to you about it, but there was even this documentary that just came out on Netflix a while back. It might be a couple years old now. I'm always way behind the curveball, but I think it talks about the family, that like Christian cult that's in DC, and a lot of the people in Washington DC that say, I'm a Republican and a conservative and I'm a born again Christian. A lot of them are a part of this like cult called the Family, and that book too, they kind of name some names, and it's heart-wrenching. And you don't just believe something based upon one person writing about it, but I think we have to understand that this is what's hard to grasp for me, being human. And that is that when we're warned in scripture about the wolves in sheep's clothing, we always think of the wolves in sheep's clothing as the mean, evil people that we don't like anyway. But the very metaphor is that they're in the sheep's clothing. We think they're sheep. We believe they're sheep. We welcome them in as sheep. We love the sheep. These are beloved pastors. These are people that helped me on my faith journey. They were part of my spiritual growth. They can't be bad. And so we don't want to just be going and tossing people out and destroying their ministries. But I'm just saying, we have to be very, very, very careful. And at the end of the day, when we put stuff in the scales, truth of what's in the word, what's true, is more important than these people who influenced our faith, and we read their books and we love them. We've got to just prioritize in the long run, if there's any doubt.
I agree, and I'm thinking of a couple books by Lewis, the Screw Tape Letters and The Problem with Pain. The Problem with Pain, I think, is a masterpiece apologist book. It's deep. I mean, it's way beyond. I mean, if you're familiar with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when Lewis writes, one of these other books, it's not the same. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the dude was super smart. So I'm rereading a lot of pages, and I'm not endorsing any of the Rosicrucianism stuff or anything. I'm actually just now finding out about that tonight, and I'm not saying I don't believe it. I reject it, and but I guess I would have to go back and look at some of the things that he's written in light of this new information.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's interesting.
I would be banned out of the church that I went to in Minneapolis. I'd never be allowed in the doors if I spoke that out loud. My pastor there loved Lewis and quoted him often and read all his works and taught courses on him. And I mean, I'd be excommunicated if I ever said that out loud.
Well, and there's a lot of preachers that we like and authors that we like, but it's important to not become married to anybody, any of these guys, and become so emotionally attached to anybody that we're going to, you know what I'm saying? Take their word over God's word.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
There's, I could tell you about preachers, about Christian musicians, about, just different people that I've known or looked up to, or writers that I like. And there's a lot of them that, people that weren't woke a few years ago. Man, well, there was this one guy that I met several times. What was his name? Tony. His name was Tony Perkins. Mm-hmm. And this guy, I read several of his books and I met him a few times, would watch him speak, and he just moved me. And he spoke on racial reconciliation. He told his story about how he was beaten from an inch of his life in a Mississippi jail. And I was really involved in racial reconciliation, like 30 years ago, almost, about 28 years ago. in the church. But this guy's come out and just totally, abandoned Christian principles for political reasons. And I'm just like, oh man, it's so heartbreaking. So
It is seeing the humanitarian gospel topple the biblical gospel.
And again, I'm not defending any of Lewis's works, but we have to use discernment. Okay. I will say this, that from what I remember, this person that wrote these books, I don't think there's anything wrong with the books that he wrote before, but he discredits himself because of where he's at now.
Sure.
And I'm not going to recommend, you know what I'm saying? I'm not going to recommend him, even though he had a powerful story of redemption. And just, he wrote a book. He wrote a book with a former Klansman, and the former Klansman wrote one half the book and he wrote the other half of the book. And it was about how they both hated the opposite race and they both got saved, and they, you know what I'm saying? There was reconciliation. Anyway. So that's just an example. We don't want to become emotionally attached to people, to politicians, to preachers even.
Yeah, absolutely. I worked for a theologian when I lived back in Minneapolis many, many years ago, and he was pretty prolific and wrote books and things. And so a lot of seminary students would write and they would want to interview him and incorporate him somehow into their dissertation or whatever. And he would always say no. And the response that he would give them is, I don't want anyone to write a book on me until I'm dead, because I still have plenty of time to screw up, and obviously he wasn't planning on it, but he had observed so many people that led these fantastically wonderful biblical lives. They had these great ministries, and then they crashed and burned at the very end of it. And we even see that with so many of the kings of Israel. We saw that pattern in scripture as well. And he certainly wasn't banking on it, but one of the things that he always would ask us to pray is like, pray I finish well, pray I finish well. And he feared that, when you get into that phase now where you're going into elderliness, that's when the enemy comes and can, attack you and make you feel worthless. And I got to make my mark, and he knew that was going to be a vulnerable time in his life. And so he would always tell these people, if I'm still a great theologian after I'm dead, you can write a book about me then. And I thought that was so wise, because, even with some of the recent deconstruction characters and some of the things that have come out, I was heartbroken over Josh Harris and Ravi Zacharias. I mean, these are big ones out. K-Max of DC Talk. It's just heart-wrenching. These are the people you grew up, you read their books, and so it really is true that we really can't make any sort of final calls on people until we see how it plays out. And I mean, that was just what hit me so hard about Alice Bailey is, we never know when we're going to be so vulnerable for attack that the enemy can take a 35-year foundation and just slowly lull us into the weeds.
Something else I kind of want to throw in here as we kind of wind down tonight. We're going to get into demystifying Theosophy tomorrow night, and we're going to talk more about this. But as we're talking about people like Lewis and just some other people, I saw some other names brought up. I'm not going to bring them up, but I guess for me, a rule would be a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. And that's something to keep in mind. I've got some other things that I'm just like, I don't want to get into it because it's just too deep. You know what I mean? And it could get, we could argue everywhere. Let me say this though. Okay. Russ, our friend Russ, I spent a lot of time with that guy. Okay. And I know he was the real deal. A few years ago, there was an accusation made about him. And it was a completely false accusation from a guy out of Alaska. Well, I think it was Steve Quayle and Doug Hagman, and sued this guy because on behalf of Russ and on behalf of themselves. Okay, they won the lawsuit, by the way. But had that not happened, what kind of legacy could have Russ had if this could have, the person that was making these statements had a lot of followers, and I don't know how they got so many followers. Okay. A lot, tens of thousands of subscribers on Facebook. Okay. And the dude, the funny thing is, Jared and I called him out a few months before he did that because he was making a judgment about somebody else with absolutely no evidence. And we're like, what's up with this dude? You know? Anyway, and it was sometime last year I got contacted by somebody, and I found out that somebody had made accusations about Russ and myself. And we were able to confront this person, and they admitted that they lied about us. Now, this was only mentioned privately. It wasn't mentioned on the air or anything like that. But when you put something out like that, you can't bring that back. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And the accusation was, man, it was a nightmare. So keep that in mind. And I'm not defending anybody. I'm not saying anybody's name. But a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. So God's going to cut all the bad trees down, and he's going to deal with them. He's going to throw them into the fire. So anyway, I like that. I want to finish, I want to finish strong. I want to finish good. And I take that pretty seriously. And we think about a lot of these, types of things. We always say, hey, go research it yourself, folks. Don't take my word for it. I'm just a man. I read the Bible the best I can, but I don't believe some of the things I believed 5 years ago because I'm learning, So anyway, I don't know if I just mutilated that or not, but I'm just.
Oh, yeah. It is tough because, the unfortunate thing too is anytime a man gets a large ministry, there's always jealousy, and this stuff kind of does happen. And I saw that firsthand when I worked for that theologian. There was all sorts of accusations. People nitpick everything that you say. And there is a lot of covetousness between pastors, and a lot of how big is your church, and how come my church is so small? And the enemy, he'll just do anything he can, he'll do anything that he can. But I don't think that it is, I don't think that our goal should be, let's find every, wolf in sheep's clothing out there and expose them. It's simply, we have to have a method of testing the spirits to know whether they're of God for our own safety and protection in moving forward in truth.
So, hey, Vic, and I'm glad you said that too, because we hear a lot of things about a lot of people, and other ministers and other people that do what we do. But most of them we do not call out publicly because we're afraid that would be a stumbling block. And also, I don't, you know what I'm saying? Some of these things I know, and I completely disagree with the way that they're publicly doing ministry. But I'm not going, there's too many lost people for me to attack somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay. There's people out there that I'm just like, oh man, this is not good. This is not good at all. But I don't want to be a stumbling block. You know what I'm saying? Now, when that person came out and attacked Russ, I came out very publicly because I knew Russ, firsthand. I spent time with Russ when nobody else spent time with him, and I knew 100% that guy was lying, and he had absolutely no truth.
Yeah.
So that was easy for me to do because I had firsthand knowledge, okay, and of what the truth was. But anyway, we know a lot of stuff that we don't talk about. Not because we don't want to expose the evil, because we don't want to be a stumbling block, and we don't want we don't have time for public fights. Okay, we just don't have time for it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I like I just said, not to beat a dead horse, but I think, it's that fine line between, we're not out there with a steamroller for reputational damage sake, but if there is stuff out there that looks so much like the real thing and it isn't, we do need to test those spirits. And if we do think that something is ultimately not quite right, if it doesn't pass the sniff test, not necessarily publicly, but I do think that the church needs to be more heavy on testing the spirits and less heavy on clinging to the traditions.
Amen, sister. And I think on that note, we need to say goodnight. We're going to be back tomorrow night, demystifying Theosophy, or Theosophy Demystified. I can't remember, and I was the one that made up the name of it. But we will be back. Thanks, guys, for hanging out. Thanks for subscribing and liking and buying our junk and our T-shirts and our movies. We love you. We'll see you tomorrow. Hey, folks, I just met the witches and Satanists, and they're going to allow me to do an interview with them. So let's see what happens.